beautiful thing. Art is this medium in which it gets us to the parts of our lives that are beyond the conscious mind, like, or beyond words. Just sticking with poetry, you start to like layer words on top of each other and metaphors, and sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. It just flows out of you, and then you have to look back at it and be like, okay, what did I even express? What does this even mean? And over time, you can read a poem that you've written, and it can mean a lot of different things. You know, each time you read it, it can mean something new to you. You can pull different parts out of it, even from something you wrote yourself. And I think that's because poetry gets us as close as we can get using language to all the places beyond words. I don't know. I just imagine you being in some form of like beautiful gallery full of platoons, like an art gallery or some sort, like with pictures of platoons on the wall or something framed really immaculately or something.
I like that. I think about, for some reason, it abstracts and makes me think of a bunch of posts sticking out of the ocean just where they shouldn't be. Like there's no ground in the bottom. They're just in the middle of the ocean, and there's just thousands of posts poking up out of everything, and that's the gallery. It's like it's outside, and it is impossible, and it just exists. And then that's where we are. That's where I am. I am the gallery of platoons right now.
That's a really nice picture. Thank you for sharing. I look forward every week to seeing the names that you bring to the conversation.
I'm glad someone's looking forward to it at least.
Well, I don't think they're in the video, are they? No one knows what we're talking about except
they can't see it, but we talk about it, so yeah.
Perfect. Anyway, I think that kind of is in line with the theme of today's podcast episode or conversation around poetry, poetic ways of thinking, being, and living. I've been spending hours, ungodly amounts of hours, creating a video about how to write poetry. And I'm very excited to share it with the world. If you're listening to this, it's already out. So go to our YouTube channel. If you're already listening on YouTube, great. We'll link it in the description.
At LIFEFORM Labs, if anybody was wondering.
Yes, at LIFEFORM Labs. Mm-hmm. But it's a beautiful video that walks through the process of how to write poetry, particularly for better understanding who you are, the world around you, and making sense of like the most potent experiences in life, the traumas, hardships, growth, like, and also the beautiful moments and whatever that means for you. But like, it's a beautiful journey. And I think this conversation today will mirror in a lot of ways. But I'm particularly interested in exploring more so the broader implications of poetry. I've been reviewing a lot for myself and what poetry has meant to me, but I think poetry has meant a lot of things to a lot of people. It's for everyone. And I want to like share how poetry has really bloomed into this beautiful thing that used to be like super rigid in times of past to like over the centuries has really turned into something that's really self-expressive and authentic, vulnerable in a lot of ways. So I did a lot of research and pulled some poets from the cabinetry and just like polished them off and have some poems to read for people from like great poets of, you know, the past that inspired me, and things like that. I think you brought some beautiful poetic examples as well to share with everybody. So I think that's what we're going to do. We're just going to go through the history of poetry in this vein. Do you have anything else that you want to add to the conversation before I jump in?
Yeah, well, we're all poets. That was the one thing I wanted to say before we got started. We're just showcasing poetry, but everyone's a poet. And also, interestingly, there's a modern psychologist who breaks down the 4 personality types, and one of them is poet. And the poet is usually more sad or in a dark place more often than in a lighter mood, in a brighter place. So it's like at the tail end of what you could consider the happiness spectrum, if you want to call it that, out of all the personality types, but also the most artistic. And I thought that was very interesting to just mention before we get started. But yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. Okay, so I want to start. I'm going back. There are various poems throughout the ages, especially ones that are really, really long. I wanted to start my journey with a really prominent figure in arts generally, which is Shakespeare and William Shakespeare and Sonnet 18. If you have not heard this poem before, you are living in a box, probably. Like you've had to hear this poem before, so maybe it's so I just want to read it, and here we go. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake darling buds of May, and summer's leaf hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed. And every fair from fair sometime declines, by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. By thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of thou fair thou oust, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade. When in eternal lines to time thou growest, so as long as men can breathe, their eyes can see. So long lives this, and this gives life to thee. So Shakespeare's Shall I Compare Thee to a Summer's Day poem. Have you heard this?
Of course.
Okay, just making sure. What did you think about it? How did it make you feel?
I always just get pulled back to summer days in Utah, like as a teenager. There was a specific time of life when I discovered this poem, and also when I was laying out in the sun almost every day after school, just come home, lay in my front yard, and then wait for about an hour, and then all my friends would just start showing up at my house because that was where we would hang out, maybe do some sidewalk chalk outside and like do some art, take some pictures, play some music, whatever. It was like the prep to that was this moment in time that was just me and the sun and the yard and the day, like encapsulated in that moment, in that 1 hour. And this poem usually brings me back to that for whatever reason. That's what I think of. What about you?
Yeah, that's really pretty. I remember moments. It does bring me back to a summer's day, but it pulls me back to moments of like being on the ocean and just growing up in Florida, being on a boat, rocking back and forth over the ocean waves and just seeing sunlight spatter, across.
Cool.
And it's, I think, a beautiful image that comes to mind, but I don't know if I like fully connect with it, mostly just because of like, I think, Old English barrier, just because of how it's saying things. And so I don't fully grasp what it's exactly trying to mean. That me personally. No, I don't speak Old English. It was like, I don't know, it's something that's really difficult, like just trying to climb through mud and just like fighting for every inch when I was going through like literature class in, 5th, 6th grade, and like starting to read some of this for the first time. I liked reading things that spoke like I speak. And so it felt like really, really inaccessible to me. Does that come on? Yeah.
You're making me think I must be a very arrogant person, because I always thought like I totally get what this guy's talking about every time I read any Shakespeare.
Oh my goodness.
I have no idea if I.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. So have you read a lot of like Old English literature?
Only in courses in college and high school, which I had quite a few, but it's been some years now, so I couldn't. It's not fresh on my mind, I guess is what I would say. But I did spend time with it at a point. Yeah.
I think everybody has to get exposed to it to some degree or another, especially if you're like going into a public education system, especially like in the US or any like modern country. You're going to get exposed to these ideas and really old timeless classics. And I think they are beautiful just to hear, to listen to. But I do struggle to relate to them in certain ways because it's not it doesn't speak the way I speak. And that happens with everything. I think every like form of art to some degree or another, like things become dated and it makes it harder to relate for the newest generation of people. And so
I'm so glad you said that, because I was just thinking in my mind, like, maybe I'm closer to Shakespeare than I am to Gen Z. Maybe something's wrong with millennials. We must be growing like really old beards, and you guys, the new kids are actually the ones that are bringing it all in. We feel young, but maybe we're old in mind. But I guess what I'm trying to say here is I actually do think that in school, at least everyone has a different experience in different locations. But when I went to school in Utah, like, we learned cursive, we studied old English and read old poems and old plays all the time. And we were not just exposed to it, it was like the curriculum. And I feel like that was part of my mind's growth and generation. And it was intertwined in my understanding of reality. And so maybe that's why I feel that it's not so alien or foreign to me. And I mean, how did you feel about that in school and in your education?
Yeah, that's really interesting to me because I got exposed to it pretty extensively. I did learn how to write cursive in school. They don't teach that anymore. I'm pretty sure they don't teach it anymore.
They do, but not in the same way, and it's not as mandatory. But
right, I think it fluctuates from state to state and so forth. But for me, it just felt boring. I didn't like reading things that didn't, like, I could do it. I would say I'm a pretty strong reader and writer, but why make it harder than it has to be? I think the point of written work and if communication in general is to communicate. And so like,
but we're losing like so much of the backlog, the importance of history. Like, you need to be able to parse that. You need to be able to understand those concepts, or else we're just
I fully do. So like,
I'm
go back in
general, not talking about you. Yeah,
for sure. I think it is super important. It's a good point to make, but I would say as time goes on, language changes, and we have to like try harder to go back and understand. It takes longer. It's more mental effort, and you're not exposed to that type of English, day in and day out. And so I think it becomes more inaccessible as time moves on, which I think is super unfortunate. The other thing about this poem, I think, is it's just comes off as super formal to me. So it has like a proper like rhyme scheme. You kind of know what's going to happen next. There's no like surprising twists and turns in it. It's beautiful, but it's very meticulously crafted and very, I would say, it tries to become as perfect, at least to me. Again, poetry, art itself is very subjective, but I'm curious if you get a similar vibe from how it comes off.
Well, before I answer that, I do want to say that you could make the same argument about current cultures and like looking at hip hop and rap lyrics, which I listen to all day to prep for this because I feel like that's where the poetry lives in the modern age. And if you don't listen to it and you don't expose yourself to other cultural ways of using language, you will think they're just as foreign as Old English, and then you'll think that there's only this other one way to communicate and understand. But I'm just super gonna hit the point. I have my whole life that language is the most fluid thing in existence, and we're constantly shifting and changing and using it how we want to. And I think slang is the real use of language, not the Oxford Dictionary. So I just wanted to preface that. What do you think about that?
I agree.
Okay.
I think I'm looking forward to hearing some beautiful rap lyrics that you're coming with.
Some Drake drama.
I agree. I agree. You need to be exposing yourself to new ideas and new ways of communication. It makes you a better communicator. At the end of the day, communication is a two-way street, and it's important that you can communicate in as many diverse ways as possible. So exposing yourself to new forms of communication is super important, and it also allows you to it allows you to like pull in different parts and pieces of different ways of communication and like make something of your own. And that's ultimately what language is and how it evolves over time. So you shouldn't ignore things that you don't understand, and that's hard to access in the moment. But at the same time, I do think there is a barrier to entry, and therefore I think it makes itself less accessible when we think about what most people are spending their time doing. It's just like by human nature, we want to do the things that are comfortable to us, that don't bring discomfort, that don't have to stretch us in that way. So yeah, it's like finding the balance and like making it a point to be exposed to it, even though it's very difficult. So going back to here, does this feel to you like super formal? Does it feel polished in a certain way compared to like the lyrics of like rap, for example?
I don't know if polished is even a word I would consider using. I think,
interesting.
Again, like the narrative that I believe in is more that it's just about your personal understanding of the words. What abstract ideas do they put in your mind? There's no like right or wrong. There's no proper way to communicate. There is only an understanding from your cultural perspective versus another person's. So something that can be expressed in Japanese, we would never understand. Well, I would understand some of it, but I still wouldn't understand it to the same depth as somebody else who's Japanese and has lived in Japan their whole life and maybe studied different things. I speak Japanese and I would understand some level of it. You would not understand it at all, but even if it was translated, like we're going to lose so much of the granularity. My point is, if if we have like a very raw, vague, abstract way of expressing something through lyrics in a rap song versus an Old English poem versus like proper prose that has just been given to us from a modern day poet who has perfect English and every sentence fits the grammatical structures as it should. Like, I don't think any of them could be considered more polished or not outside of a context. Like, there's always who's listening
subjectively to you. So as you listening to it, right? Yeah, but it's a good point to make. So that your answer is very subjective.
Yeah, cool. Should we read another poem? Sorry, I'm kind of driving us all over the place. I got a little off topic, but
no, you're fine. I guess what I wanted to showcase is that right, like we have this older English, and we're going to like jump into some rap here in a minute and share some of that. I'm looking forward to it. But there was like this whole swath of history and centuries that led us like to that point. And what you see over time is that poems themselves just become a bit more self-expressive. So while that poem is maybe inaccessible to some people, over time, what happens is it goes from like just talking about, let's say, like a summer's day, and it does touch on more in-depth topics than that, but it gets into the realm of like looking inwards as opposed to looking outwards. And I think it becomes a little bit more contemplative in nature. And that's the spark in the history of poetry that I think is like where it pushed in the direction that I really resonated with. Because I see poetry as this medium that allows us to connect deeper to ourselves and to other people in the world around us. And so the deeper we can go at a cultural level, I think the more intertwined and connected we can all become, and the stronger our relationships and bonds can be. So I'm really thankful for like the major pivot from like this very, in my opinion, how it came out to me as in this very polished form of poetry into something that I could resonate a bit more with. And so I would say this is still like pretty polished, so to speak. It's a little bit less accessible comparative to like current English of the day. But it's getting us there. So this is by Walt Whitman, who's often considered like the precursor to a lot of modern poetry. And he wrote this very famous collection of poems, Leaves of Grass. And one of them is called Oh Me, Oh Life. I think it starts to lean into the concept of free verse, which is my favorite form of poetry. And so I'm going to go ahead and read it now. Oh me, oh life, of the questions of these recurring, of the endless trains of the faithless, of cities filled with the foolish, of myself forever reproaching myself, for who more foolish than I, and who more faithless, of eyes that vainly crave the light, of the objects mean, of the struggle ever renewed, of the poor results of all, of the plodding and sordid crowds I see around me, of the empty and useless years of the rest, with the rest me intertwined. The question, O me, so sad recurring, what good amid these, O me, O life? Answer, that you are here, that life exists in identity, that the powerful play goes on, and you may contribute a verse.
Yeah, there's some nice notes in that of your insignificance, but also your part in the fungal network of humanity. If I can say so.
The fungal network, mycelium.
Yeah.
Yes. I really, really like it because it goes into that more contemplative nature. It gets a little bit more existential. It opens the doors to those types of ideologies and expression through poetry more culturally. This is a really famous poem. But I also like that it kind of, you're not seeing the punctuation, but it ends with a question, like it's "Oh me, oh life?" ? I like when poetry ends in questions because it starts a conversation. It's more like a conversation, and it's like they're questioning for themselves, but they're also giving it to the reader to ask, like, can they answer it or something along those lines. It allows it to be a little bit more open and it allows people to relate to it a bit more when you question things within the poem itself, in my opinion. So I don't know, I really like it, even though it still borrows a lot of Old English, the way it's structured and so forth. I do like just the topic and themes that it starts to hit on. So I can see like how Walt Whitman, in my eyes, is like that pivotal point through like a collection of Leaves of Grass to like get us into like some more of the modern poetry of the day.
Yeah, nice. That was a very good summation. I agree.
And then very like a little bit later than that, we had I guess like kind of around the same time was Emily Dickinson, depending on the poem and the one when she released it. But I know you have, I don't know if you brought any thoughts to the table around Emily Dickinson.
Yeah, can I jump in here with some Emily Dickinson, because she became my favorite poet from that era. And I know that you haven't watched the Apple TV series, but it like really solidified a lot of the good feelings I had about
Tell me a little bit about it, because I do want to watch it, and I'm sure people listening would also be interested.
Yeah, it's called Dickinson, and it is a loosely accurate depiction of her life through the period of when she was writing most of her poetry. And it goes through a lot of the events. There's also the Civil War and other things going on while all this is happening. But it's like you're embodying her inside of what you would know as how life is lived in the modern age. Because, of course, we think of history as this very whimsical moment that was super different. But, of course, like if you lived day to day, I'm 100% positive you would feel very similar to how we feel now. Everybody was human back then. And it brings a lot of that everyday life element to her life. And then events happen and suddenly you're just thrown into her inspirational prose, and she's just writing in real time, and there's like words flowing on the screen and just imagery, and you really feel the poem coming together. And my favorite poem of hers, they did in such a beautiful way. They gave Death a character, and Death is played by an actual actor, and he like picks her up inside of his carriage, and then they have these conversations when she's almost like lucid in her dreams. You don't really know what's happening, if it's happening or not, but her poems are flowing through these moments wherever they exist. So maybe I can read that poem if that's okay.
Yes, please do.
Okay. So this is Because I Could Not Stop for Death. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. We slowly drove. he knew no haste, and I had put away my labor and my leisure too for his civility. We passed the school where children strove, at recess, in the ring. We passed the fields of gazing grain, we passed the setting sun. Or rather, he passed us. The dews drew quivering and chill. For only gossamer, my gown, my tippet, my tool. We paused before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. Since then, 'tis centuries, and yet feels shorter than the day. I first surmised the horses' heads were towards eternity.
I actually am pretty familiar with this poem by Emily Dickinson. It's I think a more popular one of hers, and that's probably also why they put a lot of brought the character of death into, it seems like, into the show. Thank you for reading that. What I really like about this poem, and I don't know if it was intentional, but there's a particular point in it that it says, we passed the fields of grazing grain and the setting sun.
Yeah.
And then the next line she says, or rather, he passed us. And what I love about that, as someone who has dabbled in a lot of poetry, is that I think it showcases the real-time reframing of life events and experiences as you're writing poetry. Because you'll state something and then you're like, wait a minute, that's actually not true. And this is actually more accurate representation of what happened. And I think that happens a lot, at least for me. And I love that she chose to not go back and change the line that says we passed the setting sun, but to leave it there and leave her correction, her reframing in the poem itself.
Yeah, I have no idea what the intention was or not, but I like that thought.
It's all commentary.
yeah, but I do like that. I think I like this poem because it feels like you're on a journey outside of life and you're looking back at life from somewhere else. Like you get to have this moment and look within what death is by becoming death and looking at life from death's eyes, from death's perspective, I would say. And I think there is a moment of day, and then there's immortality is forever, and then there's architecture and things passing by, and that's really what life is, I guess. It's all of it encompassed at once, and I think she wrapped it all together into one poem, which is really hard to do. That's what I like about it.
I agree. She paints several scenes of I think kids at recess or something along those lines, being young, and imagine if you're with death and you're looking to the side, passing a school with kids playing. It's a very interesting thing because it pulls you back to younger parts of yourself in life. And I don't know, there has to, I feel distance in the poem. There's real dissonance there.
She's very good at doing that as a poet. You'll see it, similar threads where she just drives into the granularity and the slightest moment. I mean, she is the master of noticing. That's what she did the best, I think, was not just noticing, but then describing what she noticed in a millisecond into something beautiful that just flows like a waterfall, and you just encapsulated by this thing she experienced that must have been so strong that you're not experiencing. And the way she describes it brings it more than just to life. It's almost like you are embodying it all of a sudden. I love that.
Yes, I really, really like that too. And the fact that she chose to talk about something and take something like this on, she is able to weave in all of those intricate details. Word choice and all of those are really potent. And talk about something so broad and vast and big as the concept of death. And then the fact that she even took death head on in the first place is great too, because it is going back to that, I think it normalizes things a little bit. It helps people think about death differently for their own lives and their own perspective, and look inward a little bit deeper. And so I really like that progression of what Emily Dickinson was able to do for the world of poetry generally, and through that art form, by touching on things that are a bit more existential, personal, life like life. Yeah, I guess shattering can be a word, but at least in the concept of death. But like just those more vivid, overarching concepts, I think, is really, really cool. She, I think, and other poets like her, pushing forward in time, like paved the way for a lot of I would say even more vulnerable types of poetry, but more for like the modern times, like going into like the last century. Have you like read any poetry by Sylvia Plath or Anna Sexton? Have you heard of any of these names before?
I know of Sylvia Plath. I haven't heard of Anna before.
Okay. I wanted to read one from Sylvia Plath. This is like mid to late 20th century. So it's called Lady Lazarus. I have done it again. 1 year in every 10 I manage it. A sort of walking miracle. My skin bright as a Nazi lampshade. My right foot, a paperweight. My face a featureless fine Jew linen. Peel off the napkin, oh my enemy. Do I terrify? The nose, the eye pits, the full set of teeth. The sour breath will vanish in a day. Soon the flesh, the grave cave ate will be at home on me. And I, a smiling woman, I am only 30, and like the cat I have 9 times to die. This is number 3. What a trash to annihilate each decade. Any thoughts?
I don't know. It just makes me feel conflicted to even comment, because I feel that it's dangerous to comment on poems about Nazis.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I think what I wanted to bring to the table with it is she is confronting, obviously, like a very controversial topic. And so, or like bringing in themes that are really polarizing for different people in the world. Especially at the time she was writing this, like mid 20th century. Like this is of the time stuff. She wasn't afraid to like say something, her thoughts, and create imagery that's related to these very polarizing, like emotionally charged concepts.
Yeah, it's important that she did. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And that's what I think poetry can do that a lot of other mediums can, in a way. Like, I love that she talks about in the concepts of suffering, and I think for me, when I get out of the poem, is she's talking about that life always has some level of suffering in it. Like, it always comes back around again at a certain point. And so it kind of normalizes that through a very potent metaphor. And so I wanted to bring that just as an example of like poetry starts to like go into these various topics around, trauma, and very like whether it's like mental illness or physical suffering or whatever it might be. Like this is the start, the branching out into these more sharp,
it's the flicker,
vulnerable. Yeah.
Match in the movement in some ways.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's just like where it really starts to light a fire for a lot of like the more modern poetry that's super expressive of today.
Can I
go ahead?
Can I jump in here and read and because I feel that I need to bring up this poem, which is actually the lyrics to a song, but it's connected to the Emily Dickinson death poem, and I feel connected to what you're saying too. But in the modern age when we live right now, you really don't get exposed both as an artist and to artists, because there's just so many things competing for our attention and our resources. But this is one of my absolute favorite pieces ever, and it really changed me as a person and stuck with me. It came out when I was around 18 or 19, and so this is a song by the Chariot called Love, but you'll see that it goes in kind of a different direction. So, victim, my friend, get out, dancing and shaking, and most of all, electric, lights on, lights off, everybody hit the ground. She was beautiful like cancer. She was beautiful. She helped you into the ground. Mayday, mayday, mayday. Oh, a heart-shaped enemy, never underestimate. I helped you carry all the dead folks that we knew. You fell in love, you fell asleep. Straight into the ground she marches on, one by one, and straight into the ground she marches on, one by one. I open up the earth and let myself in. I bleed into the dirt. All in all, my friend, I am giving in. Wake up. I open up the earth and let myself fall in. I bleed into the dirt. All in all, my friend, I'm giving in. She marches on one by one. She's the wind, the setting sun, death and death. Love is lost. Straight into the ground she's marching.
Wow, lots of death.
Is it though?
At least, well, maybe not. That's what I see in my mind.
There's a
what,
I mean, there's a lot of like woven things in there. Go on. What did you get from it? Tell me first before I say anything else.
I don't know. Like for some reason, I imagine somebody being like relentless, but like almost to the point of inevitably like relentlessly walking themselves into a grave. I don't know why per se, but the depictions of like Mayday and blood, and I think there's a lot of resiliency and courage intertwined through it. Like it, in a way, it expresses what I think some form of love is and how you can look at it. But it's a little bit like finger on the trigger, like the stakes are higher. It's not like super lovey-dovey. It's not romanticism. I don't know exactly, but it's just a bit harsher. I don't know.
Interesting. Yeah, that's not even close to what I read into it. But okay. That's nice to hear. I think it's good that like this is what poetry is all about. For me, this song talks about the love and connection of Mother Nature and the realities of it. Like in the beginning, he's talking about there's like dancing and there's lights and suddenly everybody hits the ground, but it's like, it's beautiful. She helps you into the ground. Like this Mother Nature helping you through death, almost like accepting it away. I helped you carry all the dead folks that we knew. You fell in love, you fell asleep. It's like that is kind of the moment of death, I would say, is like,
right.
You fall in love, you're in love with life, in love with others, and then you're asleep suddenly, and it's just kind of passes into that. And like she's marching on into the ground. And my favorite part is just, if I wish maybe I should play the song, I don't know, but there's like so much energy in this one section when he says like, I open up the earth and let myself in, and just imagine the imagery of that. Like you're becoming part of the earth again with purpose, and you're not just accepting it, you are like evolving into it. You are becoming one with Mother Nature, and you rip open the earth. I let myself in, I bleed into the dirt. All in all, my friend, I'm giving in. You're embracing, more than embracing, you are becoming death in a beautiful way.
I would say that I can see how it can be beautiful, but there is like a certain, just like a certain ruggedness, like a certain attitude.
Well, this is a hardcore song. So
yeah. Like it's great imagery. I really love the imagery. Thank you for sharing. I would say let's definitely link it. Any music that we're referencing, feel free to drop links to the songs so people can feel it a little bit more in the way it was originally presented. That'd be awesome.
For sure. Okay, cool. What do you got? What's next?
All right. I want to start to get into the world of modern poetry. This is going to be poets that have meant a lot to me in my journey of just unearthing poetry for myself, leaning into it, what it's meant to me. And I think it's the result, the like modern bloom of like what's come in centuries past through a lot of poets that we have touched on as well as not touched on, because there are a ton. But for sake of time, I wanted to go ahead and jump into some of these, because I think these, at least from a relational perspective, because of the way they're written, they're just a bit more accessible to people, because it's not in like Old English. It's not super constrained into specific like rhythmic structures. It doesn't come off as so like formal in a way. And that for me is really helpful, and also why I love music, because it just feels a bit more intimate. It feels like the person that's writing is either one, in some of these examples, is writing directly to you, or it reads more like a journal, and it just feels more accessible and open because it's not trying to be something it's not, just for like show, for example. And so I think that's where I started to feel really invited into the concept of writing poetry for myself. And hopefully this will inspire people listening to be like, you can write poetry too. Like it's for everybody. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in. This is slightly different, I think. It's not like super poetic in a certain sense, but I think that's great too. It's going to show some diversity in poetry and what it can really be. But this is by young Pueblo. His real name is Diego Perez. Young Pueblo means young people. And he is a pretty modern poet, and he actually has been on several podcasts out there. So definitely go look him up and learn more about him. He wrote a book recently that I read last year called Lighter, which is something that he wrote after going through a really long life journey of struggling with drug overdoses, almost died due to a drug overdose, and then really started to have to wrestle with why he ended up in that position, why he feels the way he feels, and start to work through that through forms of meditation, just facing fears and anxieties, going through therapy, all of those very hard things, really things that take a long time, but coming out on the other side of that feeling like he understands himself through self-acceptance. And I think poetry and writing has been influential in his life, and words are really powerful. And so he's dedicated a lot of his life to writing books, as well as interweaving poetry into those books for people to wrestle with these that or have faced similar situations, or whatever the situation might be, to be able to get closer to the person that you really are, to be able to see yourself and face a lot of your anxieties and fears, and ultimately feel full of love and lighter more generally, but through those processes. The first page in the book, Lighter, is a poem that really hit me strongly. So I wanted to read it. Pick the path that lights you up. The one you know deep down is the right choice. Stop listening to doubt. Start connecting with courage. Do not let the idea of normal get in the way. It may not be the easy path, but you know great things take effort. Lean into your determination. Lean into your mission. Lean into the real you. So this doesn't rhyme at all. It's more reads almost like a paragraph, but structurally it's on a lot of separate lines, and it's separated. It's not framed in that way. It's framed as a poem. But it's a very direct thing about finding your way and having courage to do that and to become who you really are and living a really authentic version of yourself. And I think that was a beautiful way to start the book. If that resonates with you, I definitely recommend checking out the book. But I just wanted to share that because for me in my life, and what I think poetry does for people, is it allows them to do this. It can be a great tool, similar to journaling or something else. It can be a great avenue for wrestling with the thoughts in your minds and even understanding who you are at a most authentic level and what that even looks like, and to start to explore the possibilities of change and growth. So I thought there was a lot of overlaps there. So I just wanted to share that. Did you have anything in mind from that poem?
Yeah, I think I want to comment on what you just were talking about with growth through poetry and personal understanding. I think art is the way that we express the things we can't say or that we don't know how to confront. They find their way out. There's two ways. We go to sleep and we go into a REM cycle and we have a dream. If you remember that dream, often you'll realize that there's things coming up that are uncomfortable. But I think making art is the way you do that in the conscious waking world. It just finds a way out of you because you need to confront it. It needs to get woken up. That truth needs to be spoken and it needs to be heard by you. And poetry is a great way to do that because you have to think abstractly to put poetry together. And in order to confront things easier, being creative and being abstract is a beautiful tool to put them on the table because you can get to them without directly confronting them because they'll be pulled in without maybe even recognizing that they are the thing being pulled in. It's like you're speaking through metaphors, you're speaking through tongues, through poetry.
Yep.
And that's a very amazing tool to use. And I mean, any kind of art, but it's after you make the art or the poetry, there's the moment after when you have a great opportunity to view it, to look at it deeply and to consider what you've expressed and think back on why you expressed it. Because if you don't take that second step, you'll still gain benefit from the creation of the piece, I would say, but you won't get the same depth out of it and the understanding and growth if you don't take some time to look back at it as well. So I just wanted to point out that like you've hit on the super pivotal point, but I also think that there's like so much encapsulated in that. There's so much knowledge and understanding you could gain from analyzing your art as well. And I just think that everybody should do it. It's really cool.
Absolutely. The way I like to look at it is, at least for poetry, music too, specifically like lyrics and music, but also music in itself is this beautiful thing. Art is this medium in which it gets us to the parts of our lives that are beyond the conscious mind, like, or beyond words. Just sticking with poetry, you start to like layer words on top of each other and metaphors, and sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. It just flows out of you, and then you have to look back at it and be like, okay, what did I even express? What does this even mean? And over time, you can read a poem that you've written, and it can mean a lot of different things. You know, each time you read it, it can mean something new to you. You can pull different parts out of it, even from something you wrote yourself. And I think that's because poetry gets us as close as we can get using language to all the places beyond words, to the realm of the unspoken moments of life, to the inexplainable. Because to even explain the concept of tasting a certain food or hanging out with a friend or someone that you love and what that feels like, there's no words to describe that. You could write pages upon pages a novel about it. And in fact, there have been many novels and many songs and all of these things written about the concepts of love, for example. But they all still do it a disservice. That's why we have to keep creating things about it, because nothing ever actually gets close enough to approach what it's actually like. The words don't go there. But poetry, I think, is this beautiful medium that gets us very close. It gets us closer than just speaking language, like in the way we're communicating right now, because it allows us to pull on metaphors and imagery and layer them together.
Yes. And can I mix those 2 points you just said together? Modern language, imagery, music, poetry coming together. I want to read the first 2 paragraphs of this rap song by Cordae called Have Mercy. Sweet Lord, please have mercy. Baby Jesus, please save us. I know I used up my 3 favors. Back to sinning like a week later. New car, speed racer, crop a crib, need acres. Most of all, we all need prayer. Karma coming, beware. I don't know where I'm going, but I hope I'm on the right path. Life will hit you with a light jab. Mike Tyson, strike back. You going out, slight sad. No, I'm all about my bag. New drip, I grab. I just want to get my life back.
Oof.
He delivers it much better than I did.
Yeah,
this one,
yeah, but you did
flowed so well. But
yeah, it's always interesting to hear rap spoken normally.
I know, it's kind of fun though. It almost is like a remix in a way. It's you like somebody plays acoustic piano to some like heavy metal song, and it's like, whoa, I never thought of it could be this.
Yes.
I love this, and I do love in general like deep hip hop and rap when there's a lot of thought and put into the lyrics and there's a lot of depth. And this is like a beautiful encapsulation of, I finally made it. I got money. I've got resources. I feel the need. I need more. I feel the greed. I feel all of it. I know what I want, and like I'm out here getting it, and life is feeling good. But at the same time, like I realize that it's all nonsense, and karma's coming for me if I pull it too far in one direction, and that there's all this going on the other side. But then it's like, these are the human elements, like the Mike Tyson strike back, you know, life punches you, you hit it right back in the face. You want something else, and then you get humbled again, and then all of it repeats in this cycle. And throughout this song, he's just talking about these moments, going through all of it, and it's beautiful the way that he's talking about things, and it's like quite explicit and perverse in some parts as well. But I also think that's kind of the beauty of the culture of rap, is that the expression isn't censored. It is the raw, felt human emotions. It's something you would say only to the therapist, maybe for most people, but a lot of artists are just spitting it in their songs. And I think that's great.
Yeah. Yeah, it's super raw. And I think it's also super culturally of the time. Like the words that they're using, I think, can relate for a lot of people. That's what I get. Like just this certain language that they're using, and making references to like modern figures like Mike Tyson and so forth. I love how people, like rappers particularly, like call people out in music. They're not afraid. And so like to pull on certain things when it makes sense for what they're trying to convey emotionally. Like they're choosing what makes sense authentically to them, and what's going to, you know, most authentically represent what they're feeling in that moment. And so that's why I think it creates that feeling of that rawness. Thank you for sharing. Did you say you had another one that you wanted to share that are along those lines?
Yeah. Or what? Sorry.
That were just along those lines that fit the...
Oh yeah, I have something imagery that's just a little bit more abstract, in maybe too hard for most people to parse. This isn't like in the depths of how abstract rap goes and how leet speak it gets, I guess you could say. Like there's so much slang in such a deep level that most people wouldn't understand what most songs are about. But this is kind of, it's some in between. So I'm just gonna read this part. Young gonna wanna back, calling me splurge. Watch me jump right off the curb. Bentley spur, fly like a bird. Spin on the first and the third. Solid, I'm keeping my word. Can't be my equal. I don't know what you heard. Crank up the foreign. I swerve. Keep me a stick if they purge. Ha 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 ha.
Very rhymey.
Yeah, but what did you just hear, right?
I'm seeing like some type of like action movie right now. In my mind, just like it's young thug, like like guns blazing, like almost, but not quite. It's just, I don't know, the very like a determinedness, a little bit of savage.
There's like a call out and a way of describing momentum and movement and things that are happening.
Yeah, it's very impact.
I wanted to bring this up because I had a good friend in Tokyo that I met in 2011, and he was really into Lil Jon. And he didn't think that I would understand any Lil Jon lyrics. One day we got in this talk about it, and he was like, there's no way. It's way too in-depth for you, and there's too much... There's too many references. There's too much slang. Like you won't get it. He's too much of an artist for most people to ever understand. And so we took on this challenge, and like I read through some of his songs, and I parsed them into American white boy English for him to see if I lived up to the standards of what he thought the song was about. And I mean, he said that I pretty much understood it, but he thinks that there was like more cultural understanding probably from my upbringing. And I mean, I grew up with rap, and my cousins like lived in Mississippi, and they were always in circles of hip hop and rap, and maybe that was part of the reason. I don't know, but there was just, it's been part of like who I am as well. I just love all kinds of music. I've had lots of different kinds of friends, but I don't think that there's anything special necessarily about lyrics being understood, but they give you something unique regardless of if you understand them or not, which is that some of the words are used in a way they shouldn't be used, and there's like extra things put in that don't fit in places that express an idea in a unique way. You could describe it as edgy in some ways, but you could also describe it as like raw or broken, or maybe, I don't know, like misleading. There's so many ways I think you could describe moments within lyrics and poetry, and I think it's important that those elements are there, because they are the thing questioning language. They're the reason why Old English isn't Old English anymore, I think.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting to me, because I listened to some rap, but it's always been something I've also felt a little bit regressed from, because of that slang barrier like you're talking about. And it's probably just because like the culture that I grew up in, the people I hung around, they didn't listen to a lot of like really heavy hip hop or rap. And so I wasn't exposed to it at an early age, and I didn't like sit within it. So it's really interesting for you to recount the process of when we're like reflecting on your own past, but being able to like lean into these very slang heavy and largely misunderstood, or generally speaking, because they are kind of capped off from the general person's experiences. But I think that's great too, because they're not trying to be what everybody can understand, right? Like it's trying to be what it is. It's not trying to be anything other than what it is. It's being authentic to itself.
It is the expression, the way it should be. And I think that's why it's uncensored. It's like you don't find common artists, pop artists, mainstream artists, they're not uncensored, I would say. I don't think there are any top chart artists that are really uncensored. They're all trying to please, or they have a ghostwriter for the most part.
Yes.
I mean, that's my experience working in the music industry in the past, at least.
Had no idea. We'll have to talk about that another day. But thank you for sharing. That's a great way to do it. Like just to showcase like the authentic nature of poetry and what it can do for people. And as a reminder, like for people that want to write poetry, don't try to write for anybody other than yourself. Let things flow out. Don't judge things. Be surprised that you wrote something at a certain level. I think that can be really great for people. One person that really motivated me to do such a thing is a pretty modern poet. She's a bit older now. She's 58. Her name is CAConrad, sorry. And she has just the way she writes poetry has been very intriguing to me, and I think mirrors a lot of what I like about poetry. So she does this very interesting technique called somatics, basically somatics, but she writes poetry in nature through a meditative experience. So she'll like put speakers around her and like play the sounds of animal species that don't exist anymore and stuff like this. and then she like and then the tracks will play, and she starts to like tune into the frequencies of like the earth and to a certain degree. And she believes in writing poetry when you're in this state. And I think her poetry really does showcase what you can do when you really tap into those very authentic, natural experiences through deep meditation, through like really like forest bathing, or whatever you want to call it, like nature bathing, getting surrounded in the sounds of nature, the breeze, whatever it might be. I write some of my best poetry while in nature. So I wanted to showcase her because she's been a good inspiration, but she's also like super authentic. She's not afraid to like speak her mind. Whatever her body is holding, the charge that's within it, if she just lets it come out, and I think you can really tell.
I love this. So can you give us the context of where they are if you have them? I don't know if you have that.
What do you mean?
Like, where was she and what was she doing when she wrote the poem you wrote?
I don't know. I wish I did.
Okay.
She doesn't show all of that. So I'm going to read, "We vanish into one another as needed. In the middle of surgery, the doctor asks if we want to make use of the open chest, feed love notes and lucky numbers to the bird under the rib cage, ask it how to stop blaming violets for adapting beneath mower blades. It is a choice to not be offended when your lover says there is no extra room in his survivalist bunker. Shocked by spaces between molecules we thought were holding us together, old ghost moving into the new apartment. My name is Amanda Paradise, an intestinal expatriate, the kind of bitch who yells, humans are the invasive species, every time they point at a pretty flower and say it is not being pretty in the right place."
I love that last line.
Right? like she owns herself. She owns what she's feeling viscerally. You can tell.
Can I say that metaphorically? It really spoke to me, that last line. The people pointing to the flower and saying that it's pretty in the wrong place.
Yeah.
There's so many people out in the world right now criticizing other people and judging other people and telling them that they're not correct. They're the wrong kind of human. There's something wrong with their humanity. They don't understand anything about why they're wrong and what's going on with it. And it just frustrates me to no end that people can't look internally first, find peace, and then have a conversation and find understanding with another human. Instead, they have to try to fix the other human or tell them what's wrong with them. I think if you're trying to fix other people and you're trying to tell them what's wrong with them, there's something deeply wrong with you first, I would imagine. I don't know for sure, but I would think there's something you need to resolve within yourself if you're just externally putting it out so much. And most of it is happening digitally, but that line really spoke that truth to me. And I've experienced that with people in my life that have like suddenly out of nowhere had something like that come up, and it was like, why and where is this coming from? But also like the communication is usually not there on a personal level. It's like somebody says something just randomly offhand, openly on like Twitter or something. I feel like that's why Twitter is the grounds for this, is because like people can just spit whatever they want about anything, about any person, without having a conversation with that person and understanding if what they're saying has any value or truth to it. So that was a cool line. I love that.
Yes. Thank you for sharing. I feel like we could talk an hour just about this concept. But just to regurgitate, I think the most important parts, it's not easy to hear that, especially if you are someone, if you're brutally honest with yourself, like if you feel yourself getting tight, listening to someone say like people call people out without fully understanding the other person's circumstances. And like, if you are honest with yourself and you are that person, it's not always easy to like accept it. But I will say, poetry helps. It really helps.
I think
reading poetry, reading poetry and writing poetry is going to help you work through that. I guarantee it, if you do it the right way, if you allow yourself to flow freely. All right, I'm going to read a few more from her. I'll just kind of rapid fire because I just really love the way she writes poetry. And
rapify her. Yes. I love it. Go for it.
Rapid fire. "It takes bodies to make this world. There are no dreams without us. Standing in the middle of what we imagine. For 90 days on the phone, he tells me it hurts to not hold me. Necessity of love and poetry. Incontrovertible. I find some in the moth's flight. There is a little in the moon, more than a little in my man. A flower recently gave me enough room to accommodate my old friend's chaos and death. 18-day conversation through a magnifying glass. A tulip to challenge any artist. An edifying, short-lived fellowship, symmetry, harmony, rethink, recode, engine, flow."
Yes. Wait, pause. We got to talk about this for a second. We can't just go past that.
Okay. I figure you wouldn't.
18-day conversation through a magnifying glass. That blew my mind. That was so much the hyper focus of like somebody said something to you and then you think about it for 2 months or something.
Yes.
It's in the magnifying glass. You can't look away. Like there's no room to look outside of the magnifying glass because it's so present. I love that she just like threw it in there, and then she goes on further to talk about the conversation and like the importance of things and stuff going on with whatever.
Yeah.
What a perfect encapsulation of the human experience, I think.
She's brilliant at this. All right. Let's see. I love sitting on a bench suddenly when problems in a poem are clear. I look up 3 hours later, my favorite hours on this planet, but dare to look back and the game starts over.
Poor tortured soul trying to write poetry.
Yes. Anyway, she writes very long poems, very short poems. All of them, I think, come from the present moment. Like they're all intricately, I think, put together in a certain direction, but at certain moments, it's like she's having one thought about something and then it's onto a completely different concept entirely. And she's not afraid to just throw in new subject lines that don't connect in any direction, but they all connect somehow, some way. Like that's what came to her viscerally in the moment. And I think what's ever between those words a lot is like a really powerful thing. And then of course, like her vivid imagery. But as you can tell, she's not afraid to say what comes to her mind. She just lets it flow. She's not afraid to speak her truth, which is just really, really empowering in my opinion. So I wanted to showcase that form of poetry for everybody, which I think is like where I think a lot of modern poetry like sits. Like I think on one end you have this, and that's a lot more akin to slam poetry. So a lot of poetry people nowadays will go to like events and speak really vulnerable truths and reflections in the form of just spoken poetry. And a lot of times they're like competitions and stuff like that, which is pretty cool. So there's a lot of that. I think this is more akin to that. And then there's also like the very just pointed like Milk and Honey and those types of just like, I would say more mass adopted forms of poetry where it's around love and just vulnerability, dealing with loss. And I think all of those are really beautiful as well, but they're just very different. But I just love how it's all blooming in like so many different directions. And it feels like more than ever, poetry is this form of self-expression and everything's on the table. Anybody can write anything. And on that flip, on the resulting side of that is people being able to feel connected, to be able to understand their lived experience. You have had moments where you have obviously thought about conversations and they've lingered in your mind for really long times. You're thankful that she wrote that because it validates your experiences as a human, like you feel connected at a certain level. And that's why I love reading poetry. That's why I love going to slam poetry events. That's why I love writing poetry myself, because it all ends in this beautiful connection with others, more authentic connection. So I think I'm going to get off my pedestal or my soapbox for the day. But if you're interested in writing poetry, I highly recommend it. And if you want any more like formal guidance, semi-formal, also very entertaining. Like I said at the beginning, go watch this great YouTube video that I spent lots of hours making. I'm not going to tell you how long, but yeah, that would mean a lot to me. And again, thanks for like listening to me read some poetry. Is there anything else you want to share before we wrap up the conversation today?
Yeah. Can I leave us with something?
Yes. Drop it.
Okay. Well, this is another song, but one of my favorites. And I think this touches deep onto the moments of life, the truth of it, that if you're not honest with yourself and if you're not letting the truth set you free, it will tear you apart. But also there's like a barrier, or there's an unreal element of feeling like you can't express these things. I think that's also a shared human feeling, at least in my experience. There's like so much cultural pressure that you can't express yourself. You can't be honest with yourself because there's too much pressure. But then if you don't, you're also living this other dichotomy. So I think these 4 paragraphs, very brief, encapsulate it. This is a song by Bring Me the Horizon called Sleepwalking. My secrets are burning a hole through my heart, and my bones catch a fever. When it cuts you this deep, it's hard to find a way to breathe. Your eyes are swallowing me. Mirrors start to whisper. Shadows start to sing. My skin smothering me. Help me find a way to breathe. Time stood still in the way it did before. It's like I'm sleepwalking. Fell into another hole again. It's like I'm sleepwalking. I'm at the edge of the world. Where do I go from here? Do I disappear? Edge of the world. Should I sink or swim or simply disappear? And I think that's like using poetry to write about why writing poetry is important. If you're in such a hole, maybe find a way to express the truth some way. I think that's a hard truth to deal with, and I think it's important. We've kind of touched on it many times here, but I just wanted to end with that. Give somebody the courage to get into it.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm going to leave one more line because I think it resonates. You can have a life beyond your wildest dreams. All you have to do is change everything. I think leaning into your truths is the first step to doing something like that. So,
and change. Anyway, just change in general. Embrace the change. We both love change, and it's the best. It's the best thing. It's the best tool.
Life would be so boring without it.
Yeah, but people hate it.
It can be uncomfortable. It can be uncomfortable, but it's so poetic. All right. I think we can end it there. Thanks everybody for listening.